Thanks for pressing play on another edition of Another Dolphins podcast. The Miami Dolphins are wrapping up OTAs this week with a mandatory minicamp, which means we should get some answers to some loose ties about the Miami Dolphins roster. And joining me to discuss Jalen Ramsey, Jonnu Smith, and so much more, Joshua Houtz. It's been a little while. How you doing, my friend?
It has been a while, so it's nice to see your smiling face and nice to be able to come on here and talk about the Dolphins, who, let's be honest, as much as I'm trying to hold back and not get excited, they're getting me every time with these clips. So I'm trying not to fall into the hype, but it's so hard. So I'm doing pretty good, man. How have you been? Because, again, it's been quite some time since we talked.
Dude, I'm a little caught off guard. Did I see that Jalen Waddle gained like 150 pounds? Did I see that clip correctly?
Yeah, something like that, right? I mean, I guess they're trying to do better with team building and things. So I saw they were like out paintballing or something, the defensive lineman, and you saw Aaron Brewer and Jalen Waddle swapping jerseys. So I saw someone say that you should show that to all your league mates in fantasy and try to get Jalen Waddle on the cheap side because they might have any idea who that is. So yeah, it's pretty neat to see.
I don't know why, but I love that. I don't. It's so minor. It's such a little thing, but just seeing like a pudgy Jalen Waddle's jersey.
And it doesn't even fit on. Yeah. Aaron Brewer has like a belly shirt on. It was perfect.
But Josh, that's kind of what this team needs in terms of a vibe, right? They went in for a couple years and I'll even say wrongfully so, had the expectations of we're going to be a playoff team. It's kind of refreshing and it's a little fun to see this being a team that's going to kind of go out there and they're just focused on practicing, right? You go back to last year, half the team wasn't participating in OTAs. You had the Tua contract situation and a Tyreek contract situation. I think Jalen Waddles was actually settled pretty early, but then you had, Odell not practicing. You had so many different things going on. It's so great that like we can kind of just sit back, we get some practice notes. You see Chopper Robinson playing well, whatever it may be. You get a fun jersey swap, but overall, man, they're just focused on football. And I think that's a little refreshing and something, I mean, it doesn't matter when you get to week 3 or week 4, but in terms of June football, in terms of building towards that goal of being ready for week 1, this is really refreshing to see from this franchise.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, I don't know that at the time we really felt like anything was, wrong or out of place with the Dolphins, but you can definitely see a difference night and day. It's almost like they left their egos at the door. They're going back to the fundamentals and they all seem to be buying in. I think what I've been watching some Mike McDaniel pressers and he just loves talking about these guys going out there and chopping wood every day. So I don't know if he does that because of Chop Robinson, but he's talking about, getting back to the fundamentals and just doing a better job the day after. So I hope it all works out, but it's what you want to see and the only thing you really can see at this point of the season.
The biggest remaining storyline around the Miami Dolphins, there are a few, but Josh, I think the one atop the list is what's going to happen with Jalen Ramsey. The divorce sounds about complete. Mike McDaniel says zero has changed in my end, so I'll let Chris Greer work, and I'm diligently coaching. Where do you stand? What are you hoping to get? Or do you think there's any chance he could kind of I'm not even going to ask. There's no chance a reunion's going to happen, but when is this storyline finally going to be put to rest, do you think?
Yeah, that's $1 million question. I mean, we all kind of saw that June 1st on the calendar and thought, they might have had something worked up beforehand that, might just drop a day or two after. So that wasn't the case. But yeah, I don't think there's any way they can, rehash or reconcile their relationship. I think Mike McDaniel's pretty, every time he's been asked about this all season, he's pretty much sounds like he's over it, right? He sounds like something went wrong. I mean, there was some type of falling out there, obviously, and they just want to move this guy. So I thought it might have happened by now. I think, any day we're probably doing this podcast right now and it's going to drop later today or something. We're going to miss it in casual, in typical fashion, but it does seem like Jalen Ramsey's on his way out. And I did see some trade rumors, circling around that I wanted to get your thoughts on because, there was one that stood out, was a 4th round pick. And I got really excited when I saw that because I don't even know that I really thought the Dolphins could get a 4th round pick because it just seems like, they're going to do whatever they can to get rid of him and get that money off the books.
Who was that trade involving, 4th round pick?
It was the Carolina Panthers. It was one of those 4 trades that I think ESPN, they went to their, beat writers and they, got all of their opinions on it. And the Carolina Panthers were the team that were giving up a 4th round pick. Might have been Ben Solik that did that one. I can't remember which analyst, but I think he has some ties to Evero, the defense coordinator there. I think they might have done like some type of coaching thing together and he's talked highly of him. So I know some people are like, why would he go to the Panthers? They're not a team that, can compete. And I'm like, well, let's be honest, I don't see that they're any different than the Dolphins, right? In that situation, I mean, they have a young quarterback. We saw some promise there, so it'd be nice to get a fourth round pick. But again, I'm just expecting a fifth or sixth, and just getting him out of here.
That's kind of feels like where it's going to be, but the one thing I'm kind of holding out for is the contract, right? Jalen Ramsey is on an absolutely monster contract. And if I'm the Dolphins and I'm entering the year with what, 15, $16 million in salary cap space, that's going to go up a little bit when you trade Ramsey. I don't know why you don't consider taking on some more money to see if you can maybe get something like a fourth round pick, because otherwise, Josh, some of these other trades they mentioned are kind of ugly. The Rams give the Dolphins a 2026 fifth round pick, a 2026 round pick, and cash considerations for Ramsey. That I don't hate. You get a couple extra darts, but I'm not going to romanticize a fifth and a sixth round pick here in June. That feels kind of gross. There's another one that the Rams give the Dolphins a 2026 seventh round pick for Ramsey, which sounds absolutely insane to me. And then this one I really don't want to entertain either, and that's the Chargers give the Dolphins a 2027 seventh round pick for Ramsey and a 2027 sixth round pick. That one. The Chargers give the Dolphins a 2027 seventh round pick for Ramsey and a 2027 sixth. So the Chargers, according to ESPN, are moving up around and getting. The only way I see that trade wrapping up, Josh, is in Super Wildcard Weekend with Ramsey picking off Tua to end the game. Like, that is the only way. And I don't think there's any way you trade Ramsey to an AFC team. One, I don't think you trade him and get negative draft value as a result to ship him out. I think the Dolphins, if that's the scenario, you're holding on to him for an entire year. But man, I don't think I want to send him to an AFC team. Something like the Panthers, Rams, fine, whatever, he has experience there. But I do not want to deal with Ramsey this year once you trade him.
And I wonder if that's the Dolphins' mindset too. I mean, you'd hope so. I would not want to get any of the, let any of the AFC get better. But dude, to hear the Chargers and then to hear 2027, like who's even, what's even going, like we can't even look that far down in the future, right? So I would be very upset if Chris Greer did that. And then, extension or something would come about right after it so he can use those 2027 seventh round picks. So, oh man, the Panthers one would be the one that really stood out and would make me a little bit excited or feel like they got at least something back. But man, those are brutal. Those are some bad trades, at least on the Dolphins end.
Yeah, dude. And you kind of wonder too if there's a scenario where Miami could end up just not like a flat out, like you're not going to get another all pro. This is a very unique situation. Granted, it's happened a few times with Jalen Ramsey, but it's when you're as good as him, you can kind of put yourself in these situations. I'm not saying it's right or wrong or anything. God, man, I don't know if I'd be hyped up about a sixth round pick, a seventh round pick. I just hope you're going to get something closer to, even if you get some rookie contract that's near the end and he's been a bust, just somebody that you can kind of say like, all right, we're going to take a shot on someone where like it's a seventh round pick. It's like, maybe we'll get someone in a couple years and we got to try to hype up someone like Patrick Morris. Josh, something I wanted to ask you. I mean, cornerback issues are something the Dolphins have been able to navigate in the past. I mean, Xavier Howard, I think the Dolphins kind of did him dirty a couple times and then tried to make it right. What do you think is different here? Is it just, Brian Flores loves his defensive guys and is going to bend over backwards to make sure they're happy? Or do you think it's just Ramsey just not buying into what the Dolphins are doing in general anymore?
I think it's more the latter. I mean, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because, they saw their season kind of go down the toilet when Tua got hurt. And he's just, I don't want to waste my last years, on this team that, but that's any team, right? I don't know that that's truly your mindset. So there could have been a falling out with Anthony Weaver, Mike McDaniel. Not really certain exactly what it is, but, you're right. Brian Flores kind of did bend over backwards. I think what's interesting, at least from the Miami Dolphins perspective, is it almost seems like, again, we've talked about it, throughout the offseason, but they're building the front to kind of, make up for what they lack in the secondary. So we'll see how it ends up. And we're going to eventually see them sign a veteran, I'd imagine. But, the later the months get, it kind of, starts to get me a little bit more worried about who they're going to bring in and who can come right in and learn the system and get ready to compete. But it seems like Jalen Ramsey is ready to leave. And you mentioned just getting any type of player. I mean, that's kind of what the Rams did, right? They got a third from us and Hunter Long. They were throwing a dart. Maybe we can get something out of Hunter Long. So, maybe that's what the Dolphins do. They get a cornerback or, some type of position in need where this guy didn't work out here. Maybe the Dolphins can, rebuild him. But, man, again, those trades are brutal. And I'm hoping the Dolphins can get, a day. I guess it would be a fourth round pick. That's probably like the highest, right? Unless, again, so we'll hold out hope for that fourth rounder.
Who do you see say the Dolphins don't add like a considerably big name at cornerback, who do you have as the favorites to start? I think I did a story for Dolphins on SI recently, and it really warmed me up to the idea of Kader Kohu being a full-time starter. In years past, I was kind of under the impression that yes, he can play on the boundary, but you want him in the slot. Kind of doing a little more research on that, Josh. I've been starting to feel a lot better about saying, all right, if he's going to play 100% of the snaps, you could do much, much worse than Kader Kohu. But who would you have starting next to him?
Yeah, that's what's a little bit scary, right? I mean, right now they have Storm Duck, Igbenogany. I mean, I think Artie Burns might be a guy that.
Igbenogany.
Oh my God, who am I thinking of? Not Cam Smith. I mean, I'm
Did you
not
see
far
he
off,
got
right?
I don't know if he got hurt, but he came up limping during OTAs last week, and then we haven't kind of heard any like noise since. So that'll be
So
something to watch too. I can't believe that that's already something. It's
yeah,
got
so
to be
he'll be that.
something.
Yeah, so he'll be that guy that he's talking. McDaniel's talking about. Okay, he'll be coming. He's moving along great. We're seeing progress, and he's not going to play. He's going to be the Byron Jones situation. So I think Igbenogany, Cam Smith. I mean, I guess maybe we'd prefer it be Igbenogany. But Artie Burns. I mean, I think that might be the veteran that like at least I'm overlooking as a guy that maybe they feel a lot better about. He's has experience playing again on the boundary. So it's really that second corner because, like you say, Kader Kohu, his rookie season, I think, is when he played a lot on the boundary. And that's when he had his best year. So I always think I said I preferred him in the slot, but I have no issue with him being cornerback one. I just, again, I don't know what they're doing with his contract, right? They gave him that tenure where like someone could have came and poached him at some point. Like he's a guy that eventually you're going to have to pay, especially if you're looking at him as your cornerback one. So, yeah, Kader Kohu, and I guess I'll say Artie Burns by default. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that.
Speaking of players that the Miami Dolphins may have to play, Josh, since we have talked, there have been a lot of Jonnu Smith trade rumors going on. I think it was shortly after we finished our last show, about the middle of last week, where Adam Schefter reported that the Miami Dolphins were having trade discussions with the Pittsburgh Steelers surrounding Jonnu Smith. Some things have changed, but Josh, right on the surface, what were your initial thoughts when you saw that? Because for me, man, it was just like, here we go again. Like, we can't just keep it quiet and focused on football. There's got to be a couple of these situations going on.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I felt. And I think it's funny how I think at one point Schefter was saying how they were in trade talks, and then they weren't discussing stuff. And then he came back that same day and he's like, okay, they're back on. So I know they have an injury to Donald Parham Jr., tight end. And I know they were also bringing in, was it Gabe Davis they were kicking the tires on? And right after that, I think
So.
is when they might have picked up talks with Jonnu Smith. So yeah, I felt the same way as you. I mean, especially after Jonnu Smith looked like he was such a, integral part of this offense. Everybody seemed excited for him, the only Pro Bowler, whatever that means. I mean, he had a career year with the Dolphins, so you can't really fault him for wanting to get paid. And at the same time, I mean, I think we talked about it. I said I would have probably extended him. The more you think about it, I mean, he is up there in age. I don't know what's best for the Dolphins, long term. And again, I don't know if Stephen Ross is truly opening up his checkbook and saying, look, guys, we say they're on the hot seat. Is he saying, let's continue to extend some of these guys long term for the next regime, if that's the case? So, intrigued to see what comes of this. But again, that's what scares me. It's the same thing with the Ramsey stuff. Like, what are they going to get for Jonnu Smith? And again, when he was such an important part of the offense, I would rather see him in Miami, because if he's not, then you might be forced feeding Tyreek Hill again, because that tight end group does not look very good without Jonnu Smith in it.
McDaniel said Jonnu is a very important player in person to me and the guys. One thing that we can stand on is his professionalism and how he goes about his business. There are times when business can play a part of it, for sure. First, we've talked about this. So, that's my notes. My bad about that. But Josh, I think the key there is focusing on that Jonnu Smith is a professional. And I think this is a scenario where both sides can be right. I know that's not really right to say. A lot of times, that you want to have a definitive right side and wrong side of history. But dude, Jonnu Smith had an excellent year. 80 receptions, 800 receiving yards, 8 touchdowns. He was just all over the place. He was a safety blanket for this Miami Dolphins offense. Career year for him, and it's right, dude. Like, he's 30 years old. I don't know how long, especially somebody who leans into his explosiveness. You wonder how much longer he can get that, and it makes sense for someone like him to want to get paid.
Yeah, and I mean, he clicked in this offense. That was, like you said, his career year, and I think he broke all the Dolphin tight end records, right, for the franchise. So I mean, I would much rather see him here. And I had a friend who was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I asked him, like, what are your thoughts? And he's like, I'd be okay with Jonnu Smith, but why don't you guys want to keep him? And I mean, that's really the question I have. But I went back and looked. I think it was Spotrac had, when he signed his deal, like his average contract was like 32nd in the NFL. So I mean,
Yeah.
he does need. I mean, when you see what he did last year, you can understand why he wants to get paid. It just, I mean, you have Drew Rosenhaus as your guy. I mean, how much does he want to get paid? It sounds like, you hear Rappaport, you hear Schefter talking about it. It sounds like he wants to get, paid buku dollars. And I don't know that that's what's best for the Dolphins. Hopefully they can come to terms and, make this thing work because, again, I think this offense is going to look a lot different without Jonnu Smith out there.
The thing that makes this a little more interesting is that both Schefter and Rappaport, Josh, have made it very clear that I think Jonnu would rather stay in Miami. And I think that's something that I think adds an interesting twist to this because the Dolphins have done this in the past with tight ends who need a contract, right? Mike Gesicki, right? He was about to hit free agency. They make him a top 5 highest paid tight end by giving him the franchise tag. And Josh, I think this is an awkward scenario where Jonnu Smith deserves to get paid. I think he should get paid a new contract. But I don't necessarily think the Dolphins are the right team to give it to him. I was watching that Houston Texans Week 15 game for a show we did last week. Kat and I did that. And one thing I noticed, man, is part of what made Jonnu Smith so successful is how bad the offensive line was. When Tua's going through his progressions, it's not easy, but in the scope of a football play, when you have defenders barreling down on you, having that big body threat in the middle of the field who can shake a nickel cornerback and then run up the field for 15 yards is absolutely awesome. But I think what the Miami Dolphins are hoping to do to be the football team that it was in 2022, to be in 2023 when it was a top 10 offense, not 23rd in the league in points per game, you need 0.5 seconds longer to not target Jonnu Smith and hit Jalen Waddle, who's 5 yards behind him, doing a similar route, trying to get open in the middle of the zone defense. So I think that is my biggest issue with all this because Jonnu Smith, he's excellent. He's a great fit for this team. But instead of him getting 80 targets and having to get him, 60 plus targets if you give him a contract extension, you do wonder, like, if the Dolphins are going to be peak Dolphins and this offense is going to be the peak offense, you aren't funneling Jonnu Smith when you have Jalen Waddle. You aren't funneling Jonnu Smith when you have somebody like Devon Achane coming out of the backfield, getting open over the middle. You aren't funneling it to him when you have a reliable third receiver from week 1 through week 17, like Nick Westbrook-Akine. That is where my big hiccup is. It's like, at the same time, I could say, like, you can make Jonnu Smith happy and the Dolphins have $13 million in cap space. What does he want? Do you throw $4 million? Do you restructure this year just to make him happy and see if you can compete this year, considering the other roster resets you've done? That's kind of where my stance still is.
And I think you're spot on with that. I'm glad that you brought up Nick Westbrook-Akine because that could be, maybe a difference maker this year that, they feel better about letting Jonnu Smith go because you mentioned Gesicki as well. I mean, this seems like, he's not Gesicki, but he is kind of limited in that way, right? He's kind of like I don't want to say glorified slot wide receiver, but when he's, the way they use him is similar. And, maybe that's even where they're looking at this thing. Like, okay, after this year, if we have to, if we want to keep Jonnu, I mean, they could do the franchise tag thing again, right? I thought the tight end franchise tag, maybe it went up, but when it was for Gesicki, like it seemed like it was, pretty good value at that time as far as franchise tag is concerned. So, I mean, the more we talk about it, the more I understand both sides. And I do understand why the Dolphins might be more inclined to try to get rid of him, try to get some type of draft capital now before, he hits free agency next year. But one way or the other, this thing's going to come to a head. And I think I'd much rather have him on this team. But again, if you're paying him long-term or, that big deal that he essentially wants, that's where I'm not sure if I'm ready to commit. Does that make sense? I'm not sure if I'm ready to commit a long-term relationship with Jonnu Smith.
I was trying to find the stat, man. I think it was something along the lines of when Jonnu Smith was on the field, the Dolphins had at least a 70% chance to be throwing the football. Like, I think there's just so much that Mike McDaniel does in terms of confusing defenses. And Jonnu Smith, I don't want this to be a poo-pooing Jonnu Smith fest because he's a very good player. He's a Pro Bowl player last year. But for what the Dolphins need to be and for them to create a rebuilt offensive rushing attack, you wonder how much of an impact Jonnu Smith can have in something like that when you're saying that, 75% of the time when he's on the field, we're already going to be throwing the football. If you're showing that much of your hand, is that really helping your offense that much? When instead, maybe when you have, Jalen Waddle on the field, you're throwing the ball 55 to 60% of the time. And maybe that difference creates some sort of level of uncertainty. And I think that plays a part of it. And Josh, one thing I wanted to ask you too is like one of the craziest I mean, there are a million crazy takes on social media, so I'll back up there. But one thing I saw is like, wow, we're trading Jonnu Smith and Tyler Warren was right there. And I think everyone's missing the point so much on that. Like, this was an offense that was second in points per game when Durham Smythe was the third leading target on the passing offense. Like, it's so important to keep in mind the context of how the Miami Dolphins go about their business. There is a reason that, Josh, what was it in 2021? The offensive or the tight end room that set records, Mike Gesicki, Durham Smythe, and Adam Shaheen, I think it was, like, combined for like 8 touchdowns, and kind of what Jonnu Smith did all by himself. And they're like, wow, the Dolphins are finally utilizing tight end. They're setting these records. Let's know, because they've never needed to really have that top tier, well-balanced tight end who can do a little bit of everything. They've never had a Kittle. They've never had a Kelsey. And that's why they've never drafted a tight end in the first round of the NFL draft. Like, it's so hard to find that type of player. And I think it's important that the Dolphins find a spot where they accept that instead of trying to say that Jonnu Smith's our Kittle, because it's not.
It almost seems like they kind of did accept it, right? I mean, when I think McDaniel first came here and he brought Embry, we're like, okay, they're going to, focus. They're going to bring in a tight end, Kittle-esque, and, they're going to bring in that guy because they need it for this offense. And I feel like Mike McDaniel said, I don't really need that, right? So I might have been one of the people that said the Warren thing too, just because I know you and I loved him. So like, just seeing that they could make this hole at tight end. But that's the question I have for you, Jake. Like, I know Michael Mayer's a name that people have thrown around. He might be a better fit, overall blocking and doing a little bit of everything. But how would you feel about this room? Say you get rid of Jonnu Smith and then you got Julian Hill, Pharaoh Brown, and Tanner Connor. I mean, I feel like you'd have to add to that unit, but I mean, we've heard time and time again that Tanner Connor was going to be something, right? I mean, Pharaoh Brown already said he wanted to be like known as one of the best blocking tight ends in all of football. Julian Hill is Julian Hill. So, I mean, how would you feel about that room? And is there anyone that you would, go out of your way to go sign?
I'm going to regret saying this. I'm going to so regret saying this. Oh my God.
Do it.
I'm kind of okay with Julian Hill being the guy. Dude, watching that Texans game, I think there was like a 3-play span where Jonnu Smith was on the field for a rushing play. It did nothing. Jonnu Smith went out like as a blocker on a little bubble screen and it got blown up. And then there was another play where Julian Hill connected on the blocker. And I just think, man, when you can funnel targets to the playmakers the Dolphins have, and I think they have some clear-cut playmakers. I don't think that's much of a debate. You just need guys that can go out there and do their job. And I think Julian Hill can go out there and do that job. I think when you go back and look at his penalties, I'm not trying to make excuses, but I think a part of it was that the Dolphins had new quarterbacks coming in the lineup. And I think when you consider the rhythm and the timing of this offense, somebody was going to shoot themselves in the foot with some false starts, illegal motions, things like that. I'm not saying, Josh, that some other players can't step in, and I'm not saying there isn't plenty of room for improvement, because if we were doing Madden terms, I'd still say Julian Hill's like a 68 overall, something along those lines. But for the sake of what the Dolphins are going to need out of a tight end, like we joke about Durham Smythe and his 8-yard curls, and that's all he really does. That's okay, dude. That's all the Dolphins need from the position, especially if you can successfully get the ball to Waddle more often. So I'm okay with it. Another name I kind of like is undrafted rookie Jalen Connors. I think he's made a couple plays in OTAs, but I do think 2 tight ends take longer to develop. So I just don't know if it's a position the Dolphins are going to need to ask a lot out of. It's kind of like for years we spoke about guard. Obviously, that's come back to bite the Dolphins, and they've now invested in guard. But you're hoping that the investment in the offensive line can ease up some other positions, a.k.a. tight end.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Conyers because he was a name that I know a lot of people got excited for as one of those acorns. And, I think Julian Hill there were the penalties, but I think you're right. Like what he brings into the run game and just can do things like that. It's more than what we get out of Jonnu Smith. And, maybe like you said, they might not need Jonnu Smith to go out there and catch 800, have 800 yards and 8 touchdowns when you have Jalen Waddle, coming back and regaining his form, which I think we all hope to see. So, this thing's going to play out. I think maybe the talks with Pittsburgh had, Art Smith loves him, right? So maybe there were talks there just to kind of try to see what they might give him extension-wise so they can go back to Miami and, discuss things. But this and Ramsey, do you think one gets done? Which one do you think gets done first? Ramsey, right? Or if Jonnu gets traded? I mean, the Jonnu heat's been picking up, so I don't know. Maybe it would be Jonnu if he does get traded.
So mandatory minicamp is this week. Everything that the Dolphins have done so far has been optional, and Jonnu Smith has not attended. I hate to answer your question with a question, Josh, but does Jonnu Smith show up this week? Mike McDaniel talking about how much of a professional he is. And let me say, dude, I will not hold it against Jonnu Smith if he doesn't go to mandatory OTAs. I think he's in a spot where, dude, you got to go get your money. I totally respect that. And he deserves that opportunity to go get his money. Do you think that him showing up or not showing up kind of shows his hand about where these negotiations are?
I think so. I mean, if he doesn't show up, he kind of got his feet set in, right? Like, I want to get paid. I'm going to be not an issue necessarily, but this is going to drag on until something comes. So, yeah, I mean, I'm glad you answered that because that's what I'll be keeping an eye on. Is Jonnu there? As we'll talk about, somebody else is missing from OTAs. So, it's going to come to a head, and we're probably going to see it, like you mentioned, in the next week or so, what's truly happening. And I'm sure there'll be another report from Shefty, Pittsburgh's not interested. They're interested. Something's going to happen.
I'm trying to digest the idea that unfortunate Donald Parham injury. I actually kind of always enjoyed watching him. I think he used to play for the Chargers for a little bit, I think, if I remember correctly. And they've always, for some reason, a number two as a fantasy football player. Somehow the number two tight end on the Chargers have always been somewhat appealing. I don't know why.
Especially in rookie drafts. I remember him being a rookie at one point, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm picking him up. He's going to be something, and it wasn't something.
But I'm just interested, like, the idea of, the Dolphins and Chargers have Dolphins and Steelers have talks, and they kind of peter out, right? And that kind of means that Pittsburgh heard what the Dolphins wanted and heard what Jonnu wanted and said, nah, we're not really interested. The juice isn't really worth the squeeze. But the second they call back and say, well, we had this injury, Aaron Rodgers, all of a sudden, he's officially signed. He's going to be in the building. Does that signal that the Chargers I'm sorry I keep doing that, the Steelers are kind of close to accepting what the Dolphins are looking for if they're willing to call back and try to inch a little closer, because they were the ones to hang up, right? They were the ones interested in the player. So I'm interested, man, if that was a sign that the Steelers are close to figuring something out here, if you're going to pick up the phone again and inch a little closer to what the Dolphins are asking for. What do you think the Dolphins are even asking for?
I mean, what, like a fourth maybe? Like, that's kind of where I think they might start. I think it might end up dwindling down from there. But I mean, I feel like that's probably right in the ballpark, right? Or maybe a compensatory pick or some sort. I mean, you're right. They did call back, and it was right after the injury. So, like, if you're the Steelers, you were interested in getting new, help for Aaron Rodgers or whoever the quarterback was at the time. And, you brought in Gabe Davis. You can almost kill two birds with one stone if you got Jonnu Smith, right? He could fill your tight end spot next to Freiermuth, who, can do a little bit of everything. And then he can also be that guy that's, catching passes like you saw last year, is 80 plus.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I can see where it's very intriguing for the Steelers. And, I mean, it might just be capital and then what you got to pay him, because I mean, at the time the Steelers were probably waiting for Rodgers' deal to fall, that domino. So maybe now they see what money they have, and there's a clear answer to what they could give Jonnu Smith, and maybe things happen. But again, I thought the Jalen Ramsey thing would also be done by now. So I guess I'm just too optimistic that things get done.
Another player who hasn't been attending OTAs, and I wanted to talk real quick about. Josh, this even shouldn't be a conversation. We see the Dolphins give out a bunch of contract extensions, and you kind of understand, like, all right, like Jonnu Smith is not the type of player you want to give the contract extension to. But man, why haven't the Dolphins paid Zack Sieler yet? Why are they even letting this go when you're talking about this team building the culture and building continuity, and you don't have Zack Sieler present at OTAs? And the only reason that could possibly be is that he has a base salary of $7.3 million, a cap hit of $12.5 million, and he's only under contract through 2026. Josh, why on earth haven't the Dolphins given Zack Sieler a new contract extension?
I wish I had an answer for you. I was going to say because they haven't learned anything from like Christian Wilkins or some of these other guys. I mean, and this is that guy, right? You mentioned it. Like, he's been here for so long. He's gotten better every year. You can see how important he is to this defense so much, or the defensive line, defense so much that you let Christian Wilkins go, right? I mean, I can't understand why it hasn't happened. And I mean, I feel like for so many years we sat here and I know we talked about it. Like, Zack Sieler was making, he's not making premier defensive tackle money, and he probably deserves to be. So I don't know if maybe they've had talks, and, he's just that type of guy. He's living in an RV, he's just, he's always going to work with the team, but I don't feel like that's the way he should go about things. I think he needs to get paid. He's one of the best players, if not the best player on that defensive line. And I do not want to see a world where, this coaching staff, the next coach, I don't want to see a world where they don't have a Zack Sieler up front, right? Him and Kenneth Grant are going to run stuff for years to come. So I don't know why they haven't done it. I feel like it's just deja vu all over again. I'm just praying that, we're not seeing him playing on a different team, being that all pro, that elite player that we see in Miami.
The only defensive tackle in the NFL with double-digit sacks in each of the last 2 seasons. This is the one scenario, dude, where for July, it's always go with the flow. The season hasn't started. This is one thing where I'll be genuinely annoyed if we get close to training camp, or if training camp starts and we don't see a Zack Sieler contract extension. This is one of the guys, dude, you cannot be messing around with. I understand Christian Wilkins priced himself out and he got what he deserved. He got the massive payday. Zack Sieler, man, I'm sure he's not asking for $30 million a year too. That's a whole nother part of this, where 32 starts over the last 2 seasons. And do you remember the only reason, Josh, he's missed any games over the last 2 seasons?
I don't. I think you have it here though.
So practice eye injury, dude. He got an eye injury at practice from practicing so hard. When you want the culture to be going in the right direction, man, I think that involves Zack Sieler. So this is the one scenario where I'm just sitting there God, Miami, Chris Greer, why are you doing this for all the players you've bent over backwards and all that Zack Sieler has gone through, the tanking seasons? He's seeing everybody else get their absolute paydays, where you got to listen to Tua run down the sideline screaming, show me the money, where you got to deal with all the Tyreek Hill drama. You got to deal with Xavier Howard and Jalen Ramsey. Zack Sieler has flat out shown up every day. He didn't put whoever injured his eye in practice on blast. He has been nothing but a true professional. And I feel like I'm just wasting air saying the dead obvious of don't be an idiot and pay Zack Sieler.
Yeah, I mean, Chris Greer, for everything, the good and bad of Chris Greer. I mean, this is just inexcusable. And you mentioned him getting poked in the eye. I think the only thing good that came in that was we got to see Zach Sieler in a visor. That made me very excited. But you asked me the question with Jonnu Smith, and I guess, I mean, I don't even know that we need to ask this question because it's Zach Sieler. But could you see him not showing up next week when it's mandatory? I mean, that I think would scare me if that happened. Yeah, if that happened, I would start to get a little scared. It'd run me a lot more. It would worry me a lot more than if Jonnu Smith isn't there. I'd say that for sure.
100%. Zach Sieler, dude, he's playing 90+% of snaps. He alleviates so many headaches just being that high-purpose motor of the defense. Good grief.
They didn't sign Ben Stilley to come in and just be a camp body while he's out, right? I'm just thinking about that. I'm they just signed him just the other day, and I'm like, oh crap. What if they're prepared for? And that's something I don't even want to think about. But you mentioned it, man. Zach Sieler's probably not asking for the moon. He's been through so much here that, I can't see him wanting to leave Miami. They got to make it work. They have to figure out that one for sure.
It just kills me, dude, because I go back to Andrew Van Ginkel as the other one. Obviously, I go right to the other underrated white guy who is just a feisty, hard-nosed type of player. But during that whole negotiation, Josh, we were under the impression Chris Greer was ready to let him walk. Vic Fangio had to beg him to come back, and he comes back. He gets the 1-year contract. He plays out of this world, and the Dolphins again are all right, we'll let you walk again. And it ended up just being a horrible decision when you try to invest and trust that someone like Shaq Barrett will be your guy for the year, and all of a sudden you have to deal with the nonsense with him where he ended up playing 1 game for the Bucks or something. But that's my fear, man, is the idea of it's so obvious that this is what the Dolphins should do this. They should give Sieler the contract extension. But seeing it happen to Andrew Van Ginkel, you just wonder if they are have that big of a blind spot.
Yeah, Queasy's a word we use around here a lot. Just hearing you say that, my stomach, your heart's sinking. It's come on, man, not again, please no. And I don't want to get too far off topic, but you mentioned Andrew Van Ginkel, dude. I sat there and watched that new Madden trailer, and I was getting all excited thinking there'd be a Dolphins player. No Dolphins player, but Van Ginkel was the second screen, right in your face, and I'm like, come on,
the
man.
Hair flowing.
Yeah, look, the perfect player model. It's come on, dude, that could have been us.
Josh, before we wrap up here, you want to go through some of the orange jersey winners to see how some of these roster battles are going so far?
Yeah, and I love, breaking down or seeing some of these guys in the orange jerseys. But at the same time, I think we talked about before is almost like a participation trophy. So I kind of nitpick, when I actually feel like it means something. And seeing Jalen Wright in that jersey, like I know we kind of have high expectations for him, but and what we hope they do with Achan and getting Wright more involved. But seeing him in that orange jersey, hearing Mike McDaniel talk about him, he said that when they had exit meetings, I was talking to Jalen Wright about being able to non-verbally communicate to me. He is hunger for an increased role. I see better than I hear, and 4 OTAs in, I can see him following through with that. So it sounds like he's doing everything they want him to do to take that next step. And I think you also mentioned last year, that loaded room, you don't have much room for error. So I think year two with Jalen Wright, what the Dolphins want out of him, I think we're going to see a more expanded role to him. And do you have any fantasy shares of him? Because I was looking it up, and Dynasty's ranked 48th. I think he's like 58th in just standard drafts. So if Jalen Wright is going to get a brunt of this workload, I mean, he has some damn good fantasy value if you're into that stuff.
I was actually just doing some research on this, and I think he was being picked as like the 53rd running back last year in redraft with Raheem Mostert and with Devon Achane. The fact that he's 58th, he's dropped this year, and his competition has taken a step back. That I think is super interesting. I hear all the quotes, and it's so hard not to like what Jalen Wright is about in year two. Obviously, the Dolphins use a third round pick to invest in him. That is going to be the biggest question, Josh, because Ollie Gordon, I mean, he was just so great his sophomore year in college at Oklahoma State, where he led all of college, I think, in rushing yards, averaging like 7 yards per carry. I think we're gonna figure out right away if Ollie Gordon is going to be on his heels, or if it's going to be one of those things where we're just kind of getting hyped up over a 6th round pick. And I'm not saying that to devalue him, but I think that until I'm told otherwise, I think Ollie Gordon has that insane type of ceiling of being that top tier running back. So I really can't say much about this battle until they hit the field. And I think that's where the risk is in fantasy, right? In Dynasty, I kept right on my taxi squad. And then I think my first waiver wire pickup following the draft was Ollie Gordon. So right now, dude, I have genuinely no idea. And I could see it going both ways, where 1 week into minicamp or even after the first preseason game, you see like Ollie Gordon maybe flash, but overall he's like, you understand why he was a 6th round pick. And then you see Jalen Wright absolutely take advantage of being in year 2 in the scheme and totally understanding everything. So I hate to use a cop-out answer, man, but I don't have a good answer here, especially like it's been so hard for me to forget Jalen Wright's rookie season, 68 carries, 3.7 yards per carry, where he didn't really show that explosiveness. I think he had that one good game. I think it was like the Patriots, but this is, I want to say this is an open battle, but I could see them both on the field together strictly once and say, all right, it's Jalen Wright's job. Like, I know that's unfair, but it's so hard to tell.
Right, and I don't know, I'm going to bring this up and probably get laughed at, but Alexander Madison's also lingering, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
I don't know what they, truly what the scope of this running back unit is going to look, but I mean, it does sound like Achan's going to get more involved out in like the slot and in space and things like that, where you're going to probably ride the hot hand with these guys. So I think Wright will have the, inside track, but I can't overlook that Madison's lingering, especially when I see him with that rainbow visor on, and then you got Ollie Gordon as well. So I feel really good about this running back unit. And again, we're going to see the way it shakes out. Another guy that, got me excited when I saw him was Chop Robinson. He was wearing the orange jersey. Yeah. We keep hearing the chopping wood. And, the more I think about it, Jalen Phillips is probably my favorite player on the roster. You see Bradley Chubb, getting ready to coming out saying he's feeling the best he has. He's glad he missed, didn't come back last year. He's ready to go. I just feel like Chop Robinson, with that elite first step he has, just some of the things, the tools that he's starting to build, and even some of the promising things he showed in run stop. I mean, that was the thing about Jalen Phillips early on, was like he felt like he wasn't setting the edge right. He was kind of coming off the field in run situations. He admitted that was something he had to work on. I feel like Chop Robinson already has a little bit of a head start on what he can be. So I guess that's my way of saying, for as much as I love Jalen Phillips, is Chop Robinson potentially the Dolphins' best pass rusher with,
Ooh.
and that's with Chubb lingering? I mean, that's a question I don't even know that I have the answer for.
Here's a dumb question. Which one of those three needs to have the most sacks for the Miami Dolphins to have the best win-loss record? Who needs to be the best edge rusher on that group?
Oh, man. Phillips? I mean, I think it's got to be Phillips. I was gonna say Chubb because if Chubb's being that guy, then could you imagine how good everyone else is gonna be? Like, I think it's a trickle down effect. I think can all these guys get double digit sacks? Is that possible? I don't think that's possible. Um, yeah, I don't know if I have an answer for that. Who would you pick in that group?
I think Chop. I think if Chop does like what is I hate doing this, dude, but like he was compared to Micah Parsons pre-draft, and wasn't it like Micah Parsons year 1 to year 2, like where it was absolutely
Insane.
insane? If Chop Robinson in year 2 being the 4th defensive edge off the board in the draft, if he leapfrogs to establish, albeit coming off of injuries, if he leapfrogs to establish vets and Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips and leads the team with like 13 sacks, they both get like anywhere between 7 and 10. This roster is going to be a problem, man. This dude is going to be an absolute problem, and that makes me pretty excited. But at the same time, I don't know if correlation between one guy getting sacks equals wins. So sorry if that was kind of like a leading question there.
No, not at all. And I guess what makes me, try to reconsider, again, Jalen Phillips, my dude, he's my apple of my eye. But I mean, that first step, that alien-like first step that Chop Robinson has, and then like you mentioned, the similar tools or the comparisons to Micah Parsons. I mean, we saw Abdul Carter come out this year. Penn State breeds these guys, and I feel like him getting involved early in last season, because of injury, just getting his feet wet, I think we're really going to see him take a next step. And I can't help but wonder if they're getting ready to do that chop. The whole team's going to be chopping wood on the sideline, and that's why Mike McDaniel continues to set us up with that. The other guy on here, and I mean, I think maybe this is more lighting a fire under, but Mike McDaniel had a pretty good reason as to why Tua Tagovailoa was wearing the orange jersey, but his reasoning was because of him being able to get his players set up, being the guy, not in just passing situations. He said from the previous practice to the orange jersey, Tua had the most ownership of all the players on each and every down, particularly in non-passing downs. There were double motions where he was aligning people appropriately. He really had command and resolve within the practice of things. So, it wasn't because he was making, elite throws out there. It was more so of him having an understanding of this offense, getting players lined up. And that might be something that we overlook, right? With Tua Tagovailoa, when there's the drop off. I mean, we see the play on the field when a Snoop Huntley comes in, when Skylar Thompson comes in, but not being able to get all your ducks lined up in a row, not being able to, be that leader on the field that the players need you to be each and every down. It was nice to hear that Tua Tagovailoa got the orange jersey, and his playlist was a little bit all over the place. So it's always interesting to see what these guys are listening to in their earbuds. But seeing Tua in that orange jersey should hopefully give us promise for this season. What were your thoughts on that? And just Tua Tagovailoa in this year, where I don't want to say it's make or break, but it kind of feels almost like make or break. Like, I feel like I was telling my buddy yesterday or whenever it was, my Steelers fan, I'm like, we love Tua, right? It's his injuries is the biggest concern, but like, I feel like we're at some point we're getting way too close to that Tannehill thing where it's like, okay, you might have hit your ceiling and it's time to move on at some point, or at least a new regime might think so. But that was negative talk there. My bad.
How dare you, Josh? So I could take Tua getting the orange jersey one of two ways. The first way is that Mike McDaniel, this was a planned opportunity for Tua to have this chance to wear the orange jersey. You're talking about lining people up, the double motions, and all these different things. You almost wonder if the Dolphins coaching staff set up a day where we're going to make things very complicated. We're not going to be throwing the football a bunch, but we're really putting it on Tua to make sure these guys are lined up. And he can earn the orange jersey if it's something where they're not getting the false starts, the illegal motions, things like that. So that was the first way my brain went, where it's like you're trying to really get them in a situation where it's like you're playing in Philadelphia on Sunday Night Football and your starting center just went down, and all of a sudden you need to make things work with Liam Eichenberg. That hearing them work for those type of scenarios, that is awesome. I think that's the only scenario I'd want Tua earning the orange jersey in, because like you said, he can make the throws. That's not the issue. The issue is the availability. So if you're trying to make Tua better, getting him to master these different dynamic plays, spot on. However, Mike McDaniel is entering his 4th year as head coach of the Miami Dolphins. And every year we need to see growth. And one area I don't think we've seen growth from the Dolphins, and we're not going to figure it out until game day, is the game day operations. They do this nonsense way too much, when sometimes you just need to say, we have talent. We need to just line up and go play football. That is my one big fear. And it kind of even goes to Mike McDaniel just getting lost in the numbers of the game, where He's horrible when it comes to challenging plays. He has really bad moments of game management. That is the only fear when I hear things like that, is you wonder if Mike McDaniel's been learning his lesson and growing as a play caller, or if it's been more of a scenario where you can say, like, yes, this is part of the problem, where it's, hey, it's been a Tua issue, which I don't think it's 100% been on his shoulders so far.
Great point, because I think early on in Mike McDaniel's career, like, we could sit there and say, okay, this guy didn't have play calling experience. He's first time head coach. And you're right. At this point, like, it has to be a well-oiled machine, and they have to be on their game on game days. So yeah, this could also be a way, to try to, get everyone involved in here to, more efficient, so that the clock's not running down. You're not calling plays, shitty play calls late in the game or whatever it is. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Last thing, and it is an orange jersey. At least I didn't see either of these guys in an orange jersey, but I saw Mike McDaniel talking about Austin Jackson, and just the way he was talking about him after the injury. Like, I know he hypes up these guys, but he said Austin Jackson is as good as he's ever looked. If there's a more ready version of him, I'm super excited. That's a level up. He's ready to go and working each and every day to make sure that stays in fruition. And to hear that, I mean, we know how important those tackles are. What were your thoughts when you heard that? Or are you excited for, I mean, based on Mike McDaniel, this might be the best version of Austin Jackson, and that should be a good thing for the Dolphins offensive line.
It was interesting to hear Jackson talk about his recovery, because when he left the lineup, it was a scenario, Josh, and I might be 100% wrong, where he could still like rehab and get back, but I think him and the Dolphins both decided like surgery was the best option, and they actually mapped it out like, hey, you're going to be ready for OTAs, and Jackson came out and said, it was spot on. Like, I went to work and I was ready for OTAs. And I think Mike McDaniel's quote was really highlighting to the point of he's 100% back. Like, he's not going to like take another big step because he's already the player that he was before. I think Jackson has a great role in this offense as that dynamic run blocker at right tackle. I also think he's pretty solid in terms of pass blocking in Mike McDaniel's system. I think the Dolphins have done a great job at turning a former first-round pick who had to deal with the bust label, who was brutal at left tackle, who was absolutely brutal at left guard, and found a home for him. I think that's one of the positives we have to give Mike McDaniel and this coaching staff in terms of development, is understanding traits and understanding what makes a player good and not asking players to do things where they'd struggle. That, I think, is something we didn't see under Brian Flores. We didn't see under Adam Gase. And I think that is something that when we start to poo-poo Mike McDaniel, we start to poo-poo this offense, we do have to remember things like this where, hey, Austin Jackson was like the 6th tackle off the board in that draft class. And he did come out very young, and it credit for the Dolphins, credit for Jackson for fighting and finding a way to make this relationship work pretty successfully.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just they have all those offensive guys, right? We mentioned Frank Smith in his offensive line, history. Butch Barry in Butch Barry we trust, right? So they've really gotten these guys, into the best versions of himself. And I think that's what we're all hoping the same happens with Patrick Paul, who I had written down here as well, because I keep thinking about it. And I'm like, okay, you went from Teron Armstead to Patrick Paul. Like, is this where this team can fall apart if Patrick Paul isn't at the level where he needs to be, or if just, injury occurs, right? Because you're looking at the chart, and I mean, no one wants to see Liam Eichenberg at tackle. They got Larry Borum, Jackson Carming, I think, can play tackle. They have Ryan Hayes listed behind Patrick Paul on the depth chart. I think Keon Smith still lingering. So that is where I think the Dolphins, the season could be won and lost, and how well Patrick Paul plays. So I just want to get your thoughts lastly on, Patrick Paul, some of the things you're hearing about him, and if you agree that, and I hate to say an injury can completely derail your season. Obviously, Tua Tagovailoa goes down, you're not feeling too good about this year. But I feel like Patrick Paul just having to step up for Teron Armstead and how well he played in a second year in the league. I mean, I feel like he has a lot on his plate, but he seems to be ready to step up to it.
Teron Armstead was on, I think it's called the Nightcap Show with Chad Johnson and Shannon Sharp, and he was talking about it, man, about how he was last season. It was the most snaps he played since 2020, the most games started since 2020. I apologize. But at the same time, like, he couldn't walk under his own power until Wednesday or Thursday. Like, he could only play under pain meds, and like, he was always just making sure his body was good enough to play, and hat tip Teron Armstead for being absolutely incredible. And he deserves all the credit in the world for knowing that it was time and retiring. But man, like, I'm speechless trying to think of how great Teron Armstead was when he had to spend so much time managing his body and how he was able to make that work. But two, you wonder that while Patrick Paul, I don't think is going to be, and I don't mean this in a bad way, Teron Armstead's one of the best top 3 left tackles in the last decades. If you don't think Patrick Paul can be that guy in year 2, his first full year as a starter, which is 100% okay, it makes 100% sense. You look for different ways like, hey, how can we win with this happening? Like, where can we improve? I think there's going to be something to be said just kind of being able to practice with your left guard, being able to practice with the offensive line, and being able to develop into a cohesive unit where Patrick Paul might not be Teron Armstead as a run blocker. He might not be the guy who went the first 13 weeks without giving up a sack until the Packers game. The guy who went 17 weeks before giving up 2 sacks against the Jets in week 18. Like, he only allowed 3 sacks last season while barely practicing. That's a very tough ask for Patrick Paul. We might have a few more ugly, like floor moments, like maybe he gets beat for an ugly sack. Maybe you get those rookie younger player hiccups. But overall, I think from down to down, just overall offensive line continuity, that's where I think the Dolphins could win this battle. I don't think it's fair to put it all on Patrick Paul's shoulders in year 2, but I think he has the trajectory, the potential to be a steady, solid left tackle, at least for year 2. And then if we want to see him grow into something more, we can talk about that in the future.
Yeah, and you mentioned practicing with those guards each and every day. I mean, that's kind of, where they, get the reps and things like that. And I mean, I still stand by that. I think James Daniels, just based on, being that veteran dude, should slide over there and help him. I mean, that would be one way to, if you have any doubt. I mean, and you're right, he is not going to be Teron Armstead. He might never be what Teron Armstead was, but you don't have to be Teron Armstead for this thing to work. And at the same time, you had Teron Armstead in that room, right? He helped build, he helped, coach these guys up. So one of the last things I'll say about Patrick Paul was a quote that McDaniel had, and he said how, some of the defensive players are surprised by what he can do. So to hear things like that, and you know how good that defensive line is, the starters, if you're showing them, whether it's your speed, your power, things like that, and you're catching them by surprise, I mean, it's what, I guess, exactly what you want to hear at this point, right? This is this time of the year where we're just taking every little breadcrumb here and there and trying to piece together what's happening. So it isn't fair to say if Patrick Paul falls apart, this whole entire thing could fall apart. But I mean, I guess if he were a complete bust, I guess that would be easy to say. But we've already seen Patrick Paul out there, and I don't think that's the case. And I'm excited for what this offensive line and just this offense in general looks like, because it feels like we should see a team very similar to the 2023 where they're setting the world on fire. But, we kind of thought that might happen again last year and just wasn't.
So the Dolphins are wrapping up OTAs this week with a mandatory minicamp Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. We are going to try to do a show, Josh, maybe Thursday, maybe Friday, to kind of go over the news and notes. Since it's mandatory, I'm sure there will be a couple stories. We'll hear from the coaching staff. We'll hear from the players. And as Josh just mentioned, we're going to try to piece it all together. But that is it. That is all the time we have today on Another Dolphins podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Go out there, enjoy the beautiful weather, have a wonderful week, and most importantly, fins up.
Fins up.
Fins up.